Uh, Good morning. So I'm Mark Noble, and with me is
Aude Charillon from PTFS Europe.
yeah, and I'm with Bywater Solutions. I'm the Aspen architect at Bywater Solutions. Working on Aspen for 13 years now. So.
And at PTFS Europe, I support library teams implementing and using Koha and Aspen. And I've been using Aspen for just under 2 years.
So we're going to talk.
Yeah, so we want to tell you a bit about Aspen, but not too much, because if you already saw Jordan and Arthur's talk yesterday, you have seen a lot of Aspen already. And the main thing we want to talk to you about is the different ways now that content can be shared within Aspen, so library teams can actually share different things through it. And continuing on that theme of sharing, it's also sharing between those library teams, so building a community as well.
So just a quick show of hands who all came to the presentation yesterday that Jordan and Arthur did. Cool. So good number there. So for people that weren't there, Aspen Discovery is a discovery layer that sits on top of Koha, as well as 5 other ILSs right now. So Aspen brings in content from not only the ILS, but also websites, archives. We can show events. So the idea is to really allow library or patrons to discover everything that the library has to offer, not just their catalog. And Aspen is written in PHP and Java with a MySQL backend and Solr index. It's been in development since 2010. It originally grew out of ViewFind and kind of branched due to different needs. So ViewFind has primarily been academic, and this was more serving the needs of publics and consortia. So that grew out of both some independent work as well as work at Marmot Library Network. As Jordan explained yesterday, we had a couple of different names for it. In 2019, we branched from Pika. Basically, Marmot was not interested in growing the community anymore or working with an expanded community, so we kind of had to branch out. Yeah, we don't want to branch again, so we're talking about how to build community and make sure that it's strong for the community. Here are some of the goals. Jordan showed these yesterday as well. I'm not going to go through them since Jordan went through them yesterday. But one of the things, we do use these goals to guide what development we're doing, how we're building the community, and that kind of thing. And as you can tell, they're really, really broad goals. So there's no way that one organization can fulfill all of these, even hope to if you look at something like deep integration with all library technologies. Well, in the US, we don't even have all of the e-content platforms that are used across the world, so we need help to achieve that goal. And you'll also notice that the goals are all patron-driven or library-driven goals. So they're not developer-driven, and that's really important and intentional as well. We don't want code for code's sake, and we really want to make sure that we're building the things that libraries want and our partners want. And the benefit of this is it makes Aspen extremely customizable, so we really have a system that hopefully does work for everybody. So, as we said, Bywater and Aspen, we joined together in 2019 after Jordan and I had left Marmot. And basically, we found it was a natural complement to Koha. When I was out on my own for a little bit, all of my customers were like, you should really work with Bywater. That would be a really good idea. And in the meantime, they were also talking to Brendan and Nate saying, you should really work with Mark. Those two products will really go well together. So since then, it's really, really, really expanded. So as of June of 2023, so these numbers are actually a little bit old and we have more. But we have over 90 partners representing 800 libraries, all within the US and Canada, and 1,800 branches, over 1,800 branches representing 6 ILSs. We went over the course from 2019 till now, so almost 4 years, but not quite. We went from having 1 staff working on Aspen to now we have 9.5. So we've got a lot invested in it. And then we've added language support, and we've got at least 10 languages. We'll talk more about the languages and translations.
So for PTFS Europe, the company started taking interest in Aspen in October 2020. And I'm going to say we, but it's a royal we because I wasn't there before. But we'd looked at ViewFind before because libraries, especially in the UK, they're really looking at getting a nice experience also for their users. And the Koha OPAC doesn't always fulfill those wishes. And because ViewFind didn't really fulfill those wishes, then that's why when Aspen came onto the scene, we were really interested. And it's, when I say UK libraries specifically, it's because I'm thinking especially in public libraries, for example, they tend to have different platforms for digital resources, and they tend to not load the records in Koha, which means they're sending their users to 3 different platforms to find different things, because an ebook might be on one platform or it might be on another. So they have to check all those different platforms, and it's just not a nice experience for the users. And the other thing that happens a lot with UK libraries is they're part of a bigger organizations like a council if it's a public library, or university obviously for academic libraries, and they're not in control of their website. It's the overarching organization that's in control, which means they can't do very much with the website, or they think the website is really looking not really nice, and that's not the experience they want their library users to have when they visit the library pages. So those elements of bringing all the resources together and like the ability to build pages, what really sparked interest with Aspen as well. So in the UK, we have 6 or support 6 Aspen sites. And I was telling Mark yesterday I should have counted the number of libraries because you did, and it looks, yeah, so I'm going to stick with 6 sites. So 4 of them are public libraries, 1 is an academic library, and 1 which we support in partnership with Interleaf as the health library service. We don't have a dedicated team for Aspen. We are a team that use both Koha and Aspen, and we are all able to look at either software.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the problems we had that we wanted to solve, specifically related to some of the content sharing. So as we developed our translation functionality, it was something that we built entirely, I think, in about 2019. One of the things that we recognized was we really needed local control of language. So within the US, we have a bunch of different libraries that call the same functionality different things. So for example, freezing holds, some people call it suspend, some people we've got a while you wait, and some people call it like where is it? Or sorry, not. There's like placehold, request it, Libby, overdrive. People can change facet names. The login information can all be changed. So we wanted to make sure that each individual library could customize Aspen so that the language reflected the way that they talk to their libraries. Since Aspen is primarily a patron-facing tool, we want to make sure that that's a familiar language to them. So one of the things that's cool with the translation systems is for our English libraries, they can translate English to English, which also works really nicely. Yes. For
I was exactly thinking, like you'd be surprised the number of British library teams who really hate to see catalogs spelled with just a G. So having a really easy way to change that is really important in Aspen as well. And all those other terms that Mark mentioned, often in the UK, they won't be using holds, they'd be using the word reservations. So being able to adapt that vocabulary, even though it's a translation from English to English, that's been really useful as well.
And then, of course, we wanted to be able to share all of the work between libraries. So our libraries are all understaffed. We have a couple of libraries that have a lot of staff, which is weird, but so they can contribute all of their work and everybody else can benefit from it. So there's not very many people that we have in the US that can contribute a full French translation. So if we can borrow some of that and share that, then everybody across the world can have additional Spanish and French and German, and we've got all kinds of languages. We also wanted to make sure that we had good accessibility for users. It's something that is something everybody has to focus on now. We've got several talks here about it. So we wanted to provide a high contrast and a dark mode as well, so that all of our users are able to use Aspen. And then, of course, one of the goals is making things easy for administrators. We want to do that. So part of the way the translation system was designed was to make sure that each administrator could do that as easily as possible and wouldn't have to learn a bunch of new technology. And then also kind of selfishly, we release monthly. We don't want to slow that down. So whatever we can do to keep that cadence going is good. People get cranky when we delay the releases. So we deployed last night.
Yeah, so that's an example of a dark theme, and because you saw a lot of those problems were about translations and also some of them about theme. Before Mark shows you and explain how that content is shared, we wanted to just explain to you how that works in Aspen. Oh, and this is why I'm realizing my arm isn't long enough. So yeah, themes, it's a module in Aspen where you actually create the whole look and feel of the catalog. So you get to obviously upload your header, decide where the name of the library is going to appear, like over the header, or you just bypassing that and uploading your image. There are several options around the book covers and how they line up, how they appear. And the option I really like is there are a lot of options for colors. So you can really customize the colors of the different elements, like the search bar, the buttons. Like sometimes there's almost too much, like because there are so many different options for all the different bits. But for people who are really about the detail, then you can really build your whole theme really easily. And the screenshot shows you what it looks like. So it's really about entering your color, and there's a check on accessibility so that you make sure there's enough contrast between the text and the color. Thank you. So you build your theme. You can build several themes and then kind of store them and apply them whenever you want. So one of our libraries in the UK, they like to change their theme every month. So their header matches whichever events they have on that month. So the new theme option that Mark is going to explain is more details, is you can now share your theme with the community, and that's how the dark theme works. So everybody can import a dark theme and then make it theirs. Or if you're doing a theme that actually maybe is about a national event and you think it might be useful to other libraries, you can just in your theme click that share with community button to then make it available for others. And obviously it works the other way around, so you'll be able to import those shared themes as well.
So just kind of technically how those work. So we've got an object for the theme. It's backed by a database table. We store all of the colors and that kind of thing. Then we're hooking in when the theme is saved. We're generating CSS. That CSS then that's generated is also saved in the database, so we don't have to rebuild it every time a user goes to view a page. And then we're serving that custom CSS to the patron based off the selected theme. And the libraries can also, similar to Koha, add additional CSS, so that can get embedded as well. Because we're designed for a consortial environment, we do have the ability to, each library within the consortium can have their own theme and their own, so they get their own subdomain or their own URL based off based off that URL, we then decide what theme or themes to show, because we just added the ability to show more than one so that you can have a dark mode and a high contrast mode and a regular mode. So they can kind of choose, the patron then can choose which one they want to show, which is cool. So if anybody wants to see code later, I'm happy to show code later.
So just to explain a bit about the translations, this is from one of the US sites by Water Support, and you can see all the buttons and the kind of elements that aren't linked to the record are in Spanish, and I'm just going to show you in the next few slides, thank you, how it works, because Aspen translation works very differently to Koha. So in Aspen, you set up your language first, and you can do that really quickly because you just enter the information yourself. And what it does from a library staff point of view is it adds that option into your menu where you switch languages. So that's the first step. You just click Add New, add the information. So here I did French, obviously. And then the next step is to go into the translation module, which looks like this. And you have different options to actually start translating things. So you can either export like a CSV file of all the terms used in Aspen. And if it's easier for you to do some find and replace, you can do it like that and then re-upload your file. Or you can target specific terms. So that's what we are doing usually with the UK libraries for the English to English translation. So we'd be looking at a catalog with a G and nothing afterwards. So we get all the instances of that term. And then in those boxes underneath, so the free text field, then we'd be adding the translation there. And the last option is to use the translation mode, which allows you to kind of do an in situ translation. So you're navigating the sites and each term has a label. And if it's red, there isn't a translation on it yet. And if it's green, it's been translated already. So in the top right, you can see my account has been translated already to mon compte, and that's why the label is green. But otherwise, you just click on one of those labels, and that's the screen you get. And you can just enter your translation and click update, and your translation is there. So that's how it works for when you create a new language from scratch, or you already got your language there and you're just making adjustments to it.
So kind of behind the scenes, again, storing information in the database. We've got two different ways of doing it depending on where in the interface you are. So we use Smarty for our templating engine. So on the bottom there, that's an example of how we would embed a translation. So it's a pretty simple scheme. So you just say, you translate it, give it the text that you're translating. We use placeholders. So because those parameters can appear in different places in a sentence depending on the language, we want to make sure that you can reposition those. So if you're doing something like Arabic, you can move those. And then you give it the parameter. So they're position-based. So if you have 3 or 4 parameters, you can move all of them around independently. Or if for some reason you wanted to, you could drop one. So the in attribute here is saying that don't render these extra tags, because rendering the extra tag that you can click on will break HTML, makes the site a little unusable in some cases. So we're just saying bypass that in this case. And then we've got the ability to say where in the user interface is it. And this is just a way to help people as they're translating. So the interface that we were showing earlier has the ability to filter and say, I only want to translate the public-facing things. Staff all speak English, but we want our public users to have all of the translations they need. The top version is the same kind of version, but it's for if we're doing the translation in kind of the middleware.
So yeah, before you talk about sharing, I just wanted to say, like, back to the problem we had with translation. So at the start, when you wanted a translation and you didn't want to start from scratch, it was about finding somebody who'd already done a translation and getting the file from them and uploading it. So you have to be well connected. So usually you turn to Bywater and say, hey, do you know anyone who's got French already? So I don't have to do everything from scratch. And then, so French is the example I use because the Irish Library were interested in it. Bywater had a file, and I made some improvements to it. And I was like, but what do I do now with my improved files? How do the libraries who had it before can get the benefit of those improvements?
Yeah. So we came up with the ability to share So the idea is we created a separate server in the middle called our community server. And the idea is we can push and pull translations. So when somebody translates something or imports a translation on one site, that's automatically pushed into the community server. And then when another partner sets up that language, every day we're fetching all of the translations that they don't have for all of their languages. So we'll go through and say, oh, this term hasn't been translated. Is there one in the community server? We started doing that in real time, and it bogged the system down. So some of the page views were really slow, so we went and switched that to a nightly thing. The other thing I should have mentioned is that our mobile app also uses these translations, so it's using the same system. So if you're translating things, so if you're translating that placehold to request it, you can do that in one place, and it updates both the mobile app and Aspen itself. The other thing that's important about this system is it is checking to see if you have a translation already, and if you already have a translation, it's not going to replace what the community did. So it winds up being whoever was first to translate a term wins, and that's kind of a next step that we have to figure out is whoever was first might not have done it right, so how do we kind of moderate that? And maybe seeing like the difference of what it is in the community now so that you can say, let me review my translations and see how they match up to the community translations, maybe a way to fetch translations more than once a day so that you could go into the user interface and say, hey, I would like to see what all the community has now. So, because right now, if you set up a new language, you kind of have to wait overnight for it to really populate. Yeah, so then for themes, it's kind of similar. So we're still using the community server in the middle. We think that's a good system. And then anybody and any organization can connect into that. So we can share with PTFS and they can share with us, and it's great.
I'm sure your customers would be interested in a UK English translation.
Especially our Canadian ones. So here's how we're doing the themes. We don't want to push themes to people because themes are so personal. Most of the time, people are using those as starting points rather than, hey, I'm just going to pull across this dark theme and use it, or the high contrast theme. But we want to make sure that there's an easy way for libraries to do that. So there is a way, we showed it earlier, there's a little button that says share with community. You give it a name, it lists your library, you give it a little description, and then it sends it up to the community server. There's an approvals process that another next step is moving that into the community so that the community actually reviews them. Right now, somebody at Bywater sees them and approves them, so there's not a lot of... The moderation is, yes, it's moderated. But as we share additional things, that'll get more and more important, and we'll start talking about having committees or something to do that. When you want to use something in the community, there's a button that says import from the community, and then you can choose what you want and import it and change it however you want, because again, we're not going to overwrite your content with local data. This is me again, isn't it? So for additional things that we're looking at for sharing, we've talked with the community a lot. Jordan's talked with the community a lot about additional things that they want to share. One of the things that they're really excited about is sharing a lot of metadata. So in Aspen, we bring together all of the different records into a single grouped work. So that has all of the ebooks and the print books and the audio books from all of the different e-commerce or e-content vendors. And we want to do things like similar titles, or so you get the read-alikes, you get series data, because series is something that is still cataloged inconsistently. So there's a lot of things that they want to pull together there. Related titles, maybe some side-loaded records, how things are grouped together. So as things change names, as authors change names, or it goes from one author to another, it can be hard to automatically control what is grouped together or what is not grouped together. So we'll definitely be doing a lot of that. People have talked about like board game records and some of those toys that aren't traditionally cataloged, or maybe they are, but they just want to share them. Other things that people have talked about is placards. So we get little, essentially banner ads where you can advertise a local event, or people are also using them for
resources. And I think the resources is very much the use case here, because if several libraries subscribe to the same resource, then like each library shouldn't have to do their own placard. It would be so much easier to say, oh, there's one already in existence, so I can import it from the community, and then it's there already. And if I want my own, I can take time later on. But in the meantime, I've got it. It's got everything I need. And it's a bit the same idea, behind the pages, where I think a lot of libraries who like to talk about the fact they're getting a shiny new catalog, and often they'll create a page about tips to make the most of your catalog. So instead of reinventing the wheel of creating a new page, if you could download one and kind of use that as a template, that would be so much easier for libraries.
It's going to be really cool. I'm really excited to see what people do. And then other elements, so we've started introducing the ability for people to customize some of the icons so they can upload their own graphics. That's a wonderful thing to share. Trying to find icons for what is a book or an audiobook or an ebook are really hard. Some of our libraries have really great graphic designers that are way, way, way better than me.
I think there's a lot of library envy as well playing into that, of when you have software and you see what another library is doing with it, you're like, we want the same. I mean, we'll do better, but we want the same, and then we'll improve on it. So being able to share those elements as well, I think is really exciting for library teams. So we've talked a lot actually about sharing elements within Aspen, but it's also sharing between individuals and between organizations. So that's what we want to talk to you about next.
Yeah, so in the US, we've got our 90 different library partners. We can't really talk to all of them at once. It's a lot. We try. We host every month. So at Bywater, we've got our Aspen Gathering, which is our monthly. Last month, here's the new changes to expect in the new version. And then there's some discussion, Jordan will lead a discussion about what's coming next month. A lot of times we're getting feedback on a feature, or at least introductory feedback on a feature. And then we have also a community meeting. So the community meeting, the idea is really that it should be led by the community. Jordan always attends that as well. And it's typically talking more about functionality. So the idea is to get more feedback on features so that we know that we're building the right thing. And it's great to get that timely feedback so that we know that we're not going to have to rebuild something next month or the month after. We also have ILS-specific meetings, so especially for our non-Koha libraries. So we've got groups for Polaris and Symphony, some Evergreen, and it's just ways, so those tend to be a little bit smaller communities, and we obviously don't know that software as well, so it's a good way to get feedback on those. And then there's some special topic ones that we host, so about like how do we group things together. So, and they get really into the nuts and bolts of how things should group together exactly. different cataloging topics. So all of those are, even though Bywater's hosting them, they are open to everybody. We do try to make them at a time zone that is, or at a time that is accommodating to everybody. So first thing in the morning for us, it's a little late at night, but not too bad.
Yeah, when I started attending the community meetings, I made that comment of, I understand it must be hard in the US to plan something across 4 different time zones, but the meeting times are really late for me in the UK. So if there are more libraries in Europe or elsewhere in the world, then we need to take that into account. And very kindly, the community meetings are now earlier, and it's so much easier for us to attend. So yeah, in the UK, we are a much smaller group of library teams. We work with a much smaller group of library teams. As I said, we have, I should say, like 5 sites, because one is actually in the Republic of Ireland, so not in the UK. But so with these libraries, we are encouraging them to use the existing community channels. So there's a Slack workspace that actually the US library staff are using quite a lot. So we always talk to our libraries about that. And obviously the bi-monthly community meetings, like it's that great world where it's online, so we can, it's easy, it's an hour every 2 months. So we're encouraging people to make the most of those places, because they are both great spaces where people are saying, oh, how do I do this? Or like, does anybody have any tips? And I like it because libraries will also show what they are doing, so you get ideas. So we are also trying to get those UK users together. So from November, we are also going to set up some meetings just for them. So like, yeah, bringing them together for the first time. So as I said, 4 public libraries, 1 academic library, but they're all using similar elements of Aspen. And we really think that the kind of library sector isn't that much of a divide for them, and they could all benefit from sharing tips of how they've used Aspen so far, maybe doing a bit of work with them on refreshers of what's new and maybe they've missed, and also maybe because some of them have had Aspen for 2 years, but they don't remember that it exists in Aspen. So that's the kind of thing we want to chat with them about and see how they want to take it forward.
So yeah, not only are we building communities of users, but we're also building a community of organizations. So in just under 4 years, we now have 5 different companies supporting Aspen installations worldwide. So Bywater, PTFS, TechA, Interleaf, and Equinox all have customers. And we're trying to do a lot to make sure that we're all moving in the same direction, that we're all understanding what's going on, because we want Aspen to be awesome for everybody. So we do host some weekly meetings for different support organizations, so we all have a chance to talk about what we're doing, what we want to do, what problems we're having, which is just a nice way for us to see everything that's going on, because we don't hit all of the issues in the US, and you have questions, and we all get better. Yeah. Yeah, and of course we welcome additional people to come in. We want additional developers. We want the more the merrier. So we keep getting more and more complicated, and it makes Aspen better and better.
I think just from our point of view at PTFS Europe, we find that really beneficial. Like it's great to be able to chat to someone through Slack, but having a meeting when you can ask your question directly and show on a system, oh, this is what I'm seeing. This is the thing that's not working, like what do I need to do? So yeah, we've often come to a Monday meeting saying, well, we have a few issues, like how can you help us? What are we missing? As Mark said, we also talk about more general things about how we want to, how we are working, which the libraries we're working with, and how together we all want to move Aspen forward.
I'd say we've also talked about like how each of us implement things. So like we've gotten to learn from each other about like what works really well for you implementing. Here's what works well for us, and can share some of that training documentation and stuff so that we can all help do better for our libraries.
Yeah, we've done that recently across the implementation, and I think the commercial teams as well of kind of talk about how we all work, I guess. And I know for the implementation project, it's been really useful because we were doing things in a very different way. And like when we were talking about, oh, like, so do you tell your libraries about this at the end, but we don't tell them about this at the start? Like, so we had some interesting conversations about what like is more logical and how the library teams actually perceive that.
All right, so yeah, we want to keep growing the community.
Yeah, because unlike Koha, Aspen is a very, very new community, so it's still relatively small, but it's also because it's growing that we need to think about all those other things that I guess are given in Koha by now. So if I've been talking about tools, for example, so I know Koha is very used to using IRC, but with Aspen, we've been using Slack, and that seems to have been well received by library teams. But we are also looking at kind of other tools. It's Koha relies heavily on Bugzilla, but there isn't something like that for Aspen. So what do we want for Aspen? We are lucky that we can take inspiration from the Koha community, but at the same time, because we're introducing this at a different moment in time, there could be other tools that suit us better, or like we could just build a new one if Mark really wants it. But so that's the questions that we are having around kind of the development cycle and how it could work for all those organizations. And also, we've been talking already about supporting users. So again, having conversations about what library teams prefer in order to get together, what would help them best. So at the moment, we're also having conversation about building new websites for the community. So that's really going to be one of the next steps, I guess. So, and I'm talking about the community of library staff, but also a community of developers. So where's the best place for them to go for documentation when Mark is asleep? So we need an answer to that question.
Don't sleep.
Is that really the solution?
We're also planning an AspenCon next year, so we're still in a little bit of the early stages of that, but we definitely are planning to do that next year now that we've got a ton of people using it. So that's going to be exciting. So some of the other challenges that we have that Aude talked about, those tools for communications. The development cycle's been a little bit of a challenge. So some people really like really fast development, and some people like slower development. So we really like our 1 month schedule, but in terms of how that's released, do you pick up every release? Do you pick up every third? Similar challenges that we have with Koha as well. So what all are we picking up and when? It's always a challenge. Languages, of course, can be an issue. All of our meetings right now are conducted in English. Unfortunately, none of us in the US are good enough at doing other languages, so we all need to get with it. Time zones, of course, like we talked about, so Monday at a reasonable time is very early for us sometimes, and it's Monday morning, and then we're all just busy, so it's really hard to get together on a regular basis when everybody's busy, everybody has partners to work with, and we all have our own needs that we need to work on, but it's super important to make sure that the community continues to grow and is sustainable, so.
So yeah, that's it from us, and we hope you have some questions, but hopefully not 79,000.
It's always the same guy asking questions. Okay. So about your sharing thing, community service building. do you have some plan on like sharing patrons' data? I mean, reviews or lists, baskets?
Yeah, I would say lists for sure, especially staff-driven lists. That's definitely something somebody would want. Other user data we wouldn't share,
Yeah,
but
personal.
lists for sure. We've actually talked with a few different companies in the US that are interested in also sharing their lists with us, so we can share those more broadly. I also should have said all of the sharing is done via API, so it's JSON data that we're getting back. So there would potentially be the ability to open some of that wider, especially some of those lists, as long as the community knew who they were sharing with. But yeah, for sure.
And so you're talking about API, so it may not be centralized. You could have like maybe one Aspen talking to another Aspen.
Right.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so the community server is actually an Aspen server. We're just using different bits of it. So, but yeah,
That's cool.
And that way you can, so we actually have a couple of different shared servers. And the idea is that some of them are things that the entire Aspen community would like to share. Some are more by support organization. So there's tools to help us support libraries better. That it's just smaller ecosystems. So,
what about the covers? You also share covers?
yeah, at some point. So yeah.
Yeah, about like community bug tracker. So it's GitHub, the project hosting.
Yeah, so right now we don't so it's hosted in GitHub. Right now in terms of public bug trackers, we don't have one. We have looked at a bunch of different tools, and frankly, just none of them meet all of the needs that we have. We have some code that has been started in terms of building something that will meet all of our needs. We think all of that's going to probably get relayed through a support company's, or a lot of it, a high proportion of it would get relayed through a support company's thing. And we want to make sure that we're not like putting patron data into a public bug tracker or something like that.
One last question from me, at least. Do you have any plan on supporting Unimark?
Yeah, you're going to build that for us, right?
I have to talk to my boss.
Okay. So actually, I think if you find supported Unimark, so I think there might actually be some code in there. It is just not code that's in any sort of active use. So it would take some digging to figure out what it is.
Thanks again for the presentation. I would like to know, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, is it possible to have multiple ILS at the same time in the same Aspen instance? Not yet.
Maybe. So we've gotten this question a lot, actually, this week. We, in an earlier iteration, before it was called Aspen, did support Nashville Public Library on 2 different ILSs. So the public library was using Millennium, and their school district was using Library Solution. So it did support 2 different ILSs on one install. They since have merged into a single institution and have a single ILS. So that code still exists. It has just not been tested. Although I have a feeling we will be doing more testing with it soon, because we keep getting that question.
Because I remember that when I was looking at ViewFind that it has like a multi-ILS driver.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
And what we would want is to make sure that you would get the same experience that you would have with a single ILS. So we want to make sure that all of the holds and the checkouts work regardless of which one we want. We need to figure out some of the ILL functionality. So if you are borrowing from more than one institution at once, how that would work. So there's definitely some technical things that we need to sort out. The foundations are there. Some of the work that we're actually working on this month should help make some of that easier, or at least easier to test again. So we'll see. Talk to us in another month.
Sure. And how complicated or easy is it to add a new ILS?
It is straightforward-ish. There's a lot of good examples. So the indexing of the data of the MARC records from the ILS tends to be the hardest part. That part is all at this point using Java, which has a smaller community of developers that know it, at least that work with Aspen. So we do the indexing part, and then there's a driver that you write similar to how Viewfind works to do all of the getting holds, placing holds, checkouts. So there's some really good templates for how it works. So typically for us, when we get a new ILS, it takes us about 6 months to get them up and live. And some of that's not all coding from day one till day 6 months from now. So it's a lot of going back and forth with the library that's implementing, with whoever is supporting that ILS. It depends a lot on how responsive the ILS is, and whatever vendors are supporting that. So it depends. We've definitely had them also take a year, just if there's no documentation or the vendor is unresponsive. And then there's also library number 2 can also be a challenge as well. It's not 6 months, but you do learn the hey, library 1 said everybody uses this feature this way, and it's set up for them. And then library 2 says, no, that was a configuration option, so you have to do it a different way.
I have so many other questions. I'll talk to you later.
Okay.
Great presentation, guys. Thanks. This is more of a comment than a question, but we talked about how Aspen is a great complement to Koha, but not only in the functionality, we're also seeing a very apparent trend in the US where libraries want to adopt open source, but they're terrified, especially when it comes to doing a full ILS migration. So we're seeing Aspen as a less scary kind of introduction to open source that libraries are dipping their toe in. So the ability for Aspen to sit on top of proprietary products like Circe Dynix and III has really kind of pushed the Koha adoption forward by leaps and bounds in the US, because you have larger institutions that kind of just dip their toe in and check out Aspen and the service associated with companies that support open source products, and then see that their children aren't going to be stolen by goblins, and then they take the full leap into Koha as their ILS. So it's a really good thing, and it's moving both products forward rapidly.
Yeah, I have so many questions. The first one that arose to me is, as we were talking about this community sharing stuff, how GDPR compliant is this?
Well, none of it's patron data for the sharing.
It's all, but for the German market, it's always important that we know which data goes where, and especially if it goes to the US, as you know. And so you don't see any problem violating any GDPR-related judicial things?
No, no, it's really about functional elements. It's not. There's nothing to do with the user account that's being shared. So there's no personal data being shared.
It's great news. And another question that I had is, with the themes, how deep does it go? So how customizable is it really? Can I redo the whole interface with a theme, or are there restrictions to that?
Yeah, so people have done some pretty interesting things with it. So, I mean, it's always going to have its framework. So to break out of, I mean, it's a bootstrap theme that that's generally going to look a specific way. You can add custom CSS. We've got, I would say we have the ability to customize the things that most people want customized. We do as people are implementing. If we've got libraries sticking in lots of CSS, there's a bunch of things that we have adopted. So we've actually got a new cover style that is based off what one of our libraries did on their own. So we see what people do and we're like, wow, that's cool. We never would have thought to do that. Can we steal that from you and put that in Aspen so that everybody can benefit from it, and then put a checkbox on it, and whoever wants to use it can.
All right. And another question that I had is, you talked a lot about how this is targeted at consortia. What exactly do you mean by this? So is Aspen overkill for, say, a medium-sized public library? Is it
no.
really?
No, because we don't work with consortia.
Yeah,
so so there's a single library service. So this is where I don't know exactly, but I think each of the public libraries we work with has a dozen branch libraries, and they even, I think, if they, actually the academic library has 3 sites, I think. So they are probably the smallest ones in terms of sites, but they really value it because it looks nicer than and it's easier to customize than what they can do with the Koha OPAC. So it's, even though they are not using the consortial elements, they don't care if it looks different for one campus to another, because for them they are the same library, but it's more about the nicer experience for their users and bringing all their resources together and making it easier for their library teams. So yeah, I wouldn't say no, it's not overkill.
Okay, I think this is my last question. What's the tech stack of the app? Is it React Native? Or what do you use to? Is it natively implemented, or?
I mean, we're just serving HTML and Ajax at the end of it. So we've got a templating system. We use Smarty for the templating system, which allows you to embed variables inside what looks like HTML pages.
Okay.
So from that standpoint, it's really easy to read. It's not a React app.
Okay.
We've had somebody suggest
I don't like
rewrite
React.
it, and we decided that we had other things to do for the next couple of years than rewrite the app or the interface. The mobile app is a React app. So.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.